And welcome to our teacher workshop for this evening. We are taking a look at the Portrait Gallery's new curriculum guide called Expanding Roles of Women. My name is Brianna White. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the head of education for the National Portrait Gallery. And I'm joined by my colleague, Nicole.
Hi, everyone. Like Brianna mentioned, my name is Nicole. I use the pronouns she, her, and I work at the Portrait Gallery as a gallery educator, working specifically with student programs. So really excited to share these resources with you this evening.
Thank you. I'd like to start off our program this evening with a land acknowledgement. Although we are getting together today from different places, we gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. We have a really packed program for you. If you attended last time, you know that it sort of flew by. Our program this evening is half modeling and half show and tell. I am really excited, as is Nicole, to introduce this curriculum guide to all of you. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about it first, and then we're going to dive right into the modeling. But before we get to all of that, Nicole, what were some of the responses that you saw in the chat about our warm-up question?
Yeah, there have been some really wonderful ones. A lot of people are echoing kind of these same ideas of agrarian and domestic work, and thinking about women's work and how it's forever changing. Let's see, and also Yasmin is thinking of very specific jobs available for women in the 19th century, such as teachers, homemakers, and physical work as well. Thinking about, status, domesticity, kind of the idea of a separate sphere. Really wonderful, great comments. Thinking about class and how that plays a factor into work in the 19th century with women. Michelle has a wonderful comment. I wish I could read it all out, but thinking about women's work with an intersectional lens. And thinking about which women are working and how. So really wonderful comments that will really lead well into our discussion today.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your comments. And I would just suggest to hold on to all of those thoughts as we go through this evening. There are plenty of portraits in the Portrait Gallery's collection where we can have a conversation about women and work. We have chosen just two today to highlight to all of you. They just happen to be two of my favorites because of where they're installed in the galleries side by side. It is a serendipitous pairing of portraits, if you will. So with that, I'm going to just stop sharing for a hot second and then reshare the beginning of the curriculum guide. So the curriculum guide itself is an interactive PDF. It is a really big, in-depth, thorough document, all 160 pages of it. And the foundation of this curriculum guide comes from an exhibition at the Portrait Gallery called Out of Many, Portraits from 1600 to 1900. This exhibition is in the process of being reinstalled right now and will be on view in July of this year. So the objects from 1600 to 1900 that are used in this guide come from that particular exhibition. And then there are, of course, objects that we're using in our collection that really move us into the 20th century and into the 21st century. And those objects are part of our permanent collection, but have different homes throughout the galleries. So I just want to take you for a brief moment to the table of contents so you have an idea of the expansiveness of this particular guide. So we start off with a document that tells you all about what the guide is and how to use it. There is a section on reading portraiture and how we use portraiture, this idea of reading portraiture, visual literacy, as a way to springboard into these conversations about history, biography, contemporary conversations, but how we can look closely to tell these particular stories. And so the Reading Portraiture 101 guide really gives you a lot of different strategies and ways to look closely at portraiture. Some of them are pulled from Project Zero thinking routines. Some of them are strategies that we've created along the way at the Portrait Gallery. After Reading Portraiture 101, there is a background essay, a historical narrative, if you will, of the era that we're talking about, as well as a timeline. And then after that, you really get into the meat, if you will, of the guide. There are 9 lessons associated with this guide along 3 separate themes. So this workshop is the second of 3 workshops. The last workshop, we highlighted radicals. In this workshop, we're highlighting professionals. And in the next workshop, we're highlighting suffragists. And then within each theme, within these lessons, there are 3 lessons, if you will. The first is sort of your baseline reading portraits, looking closely lesson. The second lesson is engaging history. So using the portraits to take a look at women's contributions during the era in which these women are represented. And then the final lesson within the theme is connections to the present. So making connections with these historical figures to more contemporary figures. And so 3 lessons per theme, 9 lessons total. And then after that, there are 2 assessments. One is to stage a women's rights convention, and then another is called Sparking Civic Engagement. There are 3 digital teaching posters in this guide. We are highlighting Edmonia Lewis, Zitkála-Šá, and Ella Flagg Young. There are Learning Lab collections, 7 of them to be specific, that have been created to move between the various elements of the guide. And after we spend a little bit of time modeling, Nicole is going to take you through those Learning Lab collections. And then to round us out, there are additional resources. One of the things that I love about this interactive PDF is that there is, once you go into each of the sections, at the end of each section, there is a back to table of contents, which will bring you back to the beginning, as well as the worksheets that have been created within this guide. When you open them up in Learning Lab and download them for yourselves, they're fillable PDFs if you find that to be useful with your students. Whew. So if you have questions along the way about the guide, certainly feel free to note them in the chat, and I will ask as I'm able, or I will answer as I'm able. And then I am going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Nicole to get us started.
All right, well, thanks, Brianna. And as Brianna mentioned, we're going to be in the professionals kind of sub-theme today, and specifically in the second lesson, which is titled Engaging History, Valuing the Work of Women. So we're going to be in this section today, and we're going to model these activities in a way that you could use these in your classroom. But again, you know your students best, so you can feel free to adapt these. But we're going to start with this another warm-up. This is one that is geared towards this lesson. It's a barometer activity. So in your classroom, you could have students line up, or if you have a virtual classroom, use Zoom annotation, which is what we're going to use today. So I'd like for you to kind of get familiar with the tools that Zoom has for you this evening. And on the left, you'll see the instructions for you to annotate on the screen. So we're going to answer kind of these questions together as a group and kind of see where you fall on this spectrum of, disagreeing and agreeing. So I'd like for you to find that green bar. It might be on the top of your screen or the bottom. And to the right with the view options, if you click that menu and go down to annotate, an annotation bar should pop up just like the one below. I apologize, it's a little small right here. What I'd like for you to do is to select the stamp feature. You can choose if you want to be a star or a heart, an X, a check mark, whatever have you. And I'd invite you to right now just kind of click wherever on the screen. So I know that this is working for everyone. All right. Ooh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Ooh, awesome. I love all these different colors. Looking good. All right. So I'll give you about 10 more seconds to make your mark on the page before I clear them. All right. Let me clear those all. Okay, so I'm going to hide these instructions. So hopefully you have your Zoom all in the right place. And I'd like to pose this question to the group. These responses, as you saw earlier, they're anonymous. Brianna and I, we don't see who is marking where, but I'd like for you to just make your mark on the spectrum of this barometer activity with the statement, women do most of the work in the home. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm seeing we have a lot on the strongly agree side, some kind of moving towards the middle. I definitely say in my household, it's probably towards the strongly agree. Okay, awesome. Let's move on now to the next question. All right, parents should split the work of raising children equally. Oh, these are all on that side. Oh, there's a few that are in the middle. Okay, all right, but mostly all on the strongly agree. For everyone, about 2 more seconds, see if we have any other opinions. Okay, all right. Let's move on to the third. Women can succeed in their careers while raising a family. Strongly disagree, strongly agree. Okay. This one's a little interesting. There's more that are moving towards the disagree. Okay. All right. Keep up the good work. We're halfway. Women should be paid for all of the work they do in the home. Strongly disagree, strongly agree, somewhere in between. Okay. A little bit more spread out on this one. I sure think it would be nice to get paid for all the dishes I do sometimes. Okay. All right, and we'll do the last 2 now. Women are natural caregivers. Disagree, agree, somewhere in between. Okay, yeah, there's some on, this whole spectrum from strongly disagree to strongly agree. Okay. Last one. Parents should put the needs of their family over their own needs. Okay, so yeah, we're getting a little bit more variation here as we've gone through all of these questions. All right, so we have a few more moments if you haven't decided where you fall on that spectrum. Okay, so I'm going to clear those. So this is just an activity to get to know your students, kind of warm them up for this lesson. And as Brianna mentioned, this lesson has a handout that's associated with it. So if you'd even prefer to use that handout, I'll pull it up here real quickly. Students could fill this out on their own. So there's a variety of different ways that you can do this. Oh my goodness, apologies, I have the wrong one. I'll put the link in the chat so you can explore that at your own leisure. And I think we are ready now for our first portrait that we'll be looking at today. So let me just pull that up right here. And Brianna is going to introduce you to this sitter.
Great, Nicole, thank you. And I was thinking as we were going through the barometer activity, like with every activity in this guide, you know, you choose what works for your students and what doesn't, and adapt it to meet your needs. You know, as Nicole says in the Learning Lab collections, and you'll certainly see this as you explore them a little bit more, you know, these lessons are meant to be utilized how you particularly see fit, right? I fully expect that educators will pick and choose the things that are most relevant to them and their students, and what they know will work well with their students. Okay, so with that said, let's take a look at this portrait of Sarah Weston Seton and her children, Augustine and Julia. So as we do when we look closely, we're just going to spend a few moments taking in all of the details that we see. So I'd like to invite you to let your eyes wander over this portrait from top to bottom, side to side, all around. And think about the various, what we call elements of portrayal, the visual clues found in portraits that help us tell the story of the image. So think about setting, think about clothing, think about pose and posture, color, scale, medium. And when you're ready, invite you to note your initial observations that you have about this portrait into the chat. So what initial observations do you have about this piece? What do you notice? What strikes you?
All right, so from Marilyn in the chat, the eye level between the mother and the child that she's holding, I'm thinking about a sense of security and equality. Yasmin is noticing, you know, the wealth pictured in this portrait. And Viva's looking to how the sitters are positioned, and thinking about, you know, the three-quarter view of their likeness and one in profile. Shannon's noticing, you know, they're both children, and there's this sense of touch or intimacy. Oh, they're all coming in now. Jane kind of echoing those same thoughts of wealth, and noticing the cherries, a shoeless foot. Oh, good eye. Flowers, red chairs. Yeah, a lot of participants noticing those bare feet. Yeah, Betsy's thinking about the textures, the velvet, satin, the jewelry. Yeah. Oh, I love this comment about the white dress, and with toddlers, would it actually be that clean? It's very, very observant.
Right. So there's this right, this portrait definitely, we've got this sense of wealth, right? Everything from the materials used on the chair with the velvet to the ornate clothing, the ruffles, the hair, et cetera, et cetera. And also a sense that this is very staged, right? I mean, perhaps this is not how their everyday would look. It is looking very proper, and we have some objects in here as well that I think are helping us start to tell the story here. What are you noticing about some of the objects that we see?
Right. So there.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Nicole.
Oh, there earlier were a lot of comments about the cherries that one of the children is kind of dangling over on the mother's shoulder. Looking a little bit more closely at the objects, noticing the book in the child's other hand. Oh yeah, cherries and white, a very very bold choice. Yeah, noticing the velvet chair that they're sitting on, and suggesting these objects are likely symbolic, representing something, but we're not sure exactly. Devin has a very insightful comment about the symbolism, perhaps thinking about that book as the mother is providing education to her children, and Bev was noticing the flowers on that empire waist dress.
Okay, excellent. And perhaps, right, the book looks like a primer. Maybe it's a letter. One of the things that we can't see from the vantage point that we had, but what is so wonderful about Learning Lab is the ability to zoom in, is that book that Augustine is holding is actually perfect. We still might not be able to see it, but it's called The Art of Teasing. Oh my gosh, look at that. The Art of Teasing. So we have this book, right? And then Augustine is holding the book in one hand, and then he's holding the cherries dangling over his mother's shoulder in the other hand. There's a little mischievous play that seems to be happening here, right? Okay. And one of the comments that came through in the chat that I really did love was that our central figure, the mother, the woman, she's not necessarily taking up all of the space in this portrait. She is sharing the space with her two children. So hang on to these observations. Nicole is going to take us to the next tile here, which shows us the 4 questions that I want to ask you related to the Sarah Weston Seton portrait. Which the first is, and I'm going to say all of these, and then I'm going to show you 2 additional primary source documents that are related to Seton to be used when answering these questions. So this is the worksheet that you can find in the curriculum guide. And it's basically asking 4 questions. You can think about it like a thinking routine. What kinds of work did the subject do? What barriers or conflicts did your subject face? What strengths or desires did your subject have? And how did your subject find ways to be powerful? So as Nicole is taking us to the first primary source, I just want to tell you a little bit about Sarah Weston Seton, because I think her story is fascinating. And I'll start off by saying that you know, this portrait has been in the Portrait Gallery's collection for a little bit, but wasn't on view very often. It is really a study, if you will, in domestic harmony. And the portrait was created in 1815 by Charles Bird King. And it really, this particular portrait allowed the National Portrait Gallery to draw on a new current in American history that started to focus on women's roles in the early 19th century. This really wasn't something that, you know, that we had on view until this sort of current, if you will, came through. So this particular book right here was a little bit of a tell-all. It was called Social Life in the Early Republic. And Nicole, if you could click on the paperclip. In 1824, Sarah Weston Seton and her husband, William Seton, who co-owned the National Intelligencer with Sarah Weston Seton's brother, they hosted political and cultural affairs in Washington, D.C., really along the same lines of what Dolly Madison was doing with the squeezes that she was hosting when James Madison was president. So in 1824, the Setons hosted the Marquess de Lafayette at their house. And you can see that, I'm not going to read it, but there is a quote from Mrs. Seton in the book about that particular event. So there is this, there's this bridging, right, that's happening between the social, the political, and the cultural. So the work, if you will, you know, that Seton was doing was very much in this realm. And then Nicole, if you could take us to the next one. This next lithograph that you're going to see is a much earlier lithograph, and this is of the Marquess coming to Mount Vernon to meet President Washington and Martha Washington. So while Seton is not pictured in this image, this would be very much what a documentation of an official visit might look like. So it gives you an idea of how something like this is going to be represented in its time. And remember, lithographs, right, were works on paper. So these were things that could be mass produced and sold really as memorabilia. Okay, so I've given you a whole lot of information in a very short period of time, but let's go back to the portrait and our 4 questions. And let's think about the first one. What kinds of work did Sarah Seton do? What was her work? And you can please note your responses in the chat.
Okay, so I'm seeing mother, wife, hostess, a lot of kind of echoing of hostess, representing her husband and family as well. Yeah, the hostess again, definitely a great communicator. And you know, even also thinking about this era and manners, kind of a model of high society, as Betsy mentions. And kind of exemplifying, you know, social roles. And yeah, thinking about her role in kind of the household. And
right.
Yeah, managing staff, managing, you know, those in her household and organizing parties and functions.
Right. I mean, she created these social spaces that were really essential and enabled her husband as well as other husbands to do their work. So in a lot of ways, her work enabled his work. So let's think about barriers. Given what we've talked about, right? I've not given you an exhaustive biography of Sarah Weston Seton, but what do you think her barriers might have been? What do you think her barriers or conflicts might have been?
Right, from D. Cherry, thinking about, she is, quote, shackled and kind of the gender roles of women.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of agreement with that comment. Let's see. Yeah, thinking about her voice as well, having to gauge everything that she said. Yeah, kind of a quiet voice in perhaps business affairs. No barrier of speaking her mind. A lot of these are kind of in the same train of thought.
Right. And then what strengths did Seton have? What were her strengths?
All right, from Patricia, kind of thinking about her role as one that's described and laid out for her to raise good citizens. These are some great comments. They're coming through pretty quick. Other strengths, separating these teasing children, even.
Right, I noticed that.
Yeah, helping her husband with quiet dignity, balance, manners, privilege, and kind of social power. Yeah, the ability to multitask as well.
And when we think of actions, how did she find ways to be powerful? Or we can also think about it in terms of agency. In what ways, right, did she find agency in these roles?
Okay, so perhaps helping her husband's role. I'm thinking about political power, exercising motherhood, kind of, through her children, educating her children. Yeah, perhaps even manipulating conversations towards her husband's important issues. Controlling access as a hostess, who's invited to these parties and meetings.
Right. Oh, and I love Julie's comment. She knew everything and could find answers and get the problem solved behind the scenes. Okay.
Example to other women. Oh yeah, Marilyn, the ear for her husband. Perhaps maybe some of the barriers that she faced also, guided these actions, thinking about, she might not be one to speak out, but definitely could pass along that information where it needed to go.
Yeah. All right. Well, in the interest of time, I think it's important to start to connect this particular image with another portrait of a woman in our collection. And again, like I said, these two portraits have been installed side by side in the past, and it really is wonderful to do a compare and contrast. So I'm going to turn it over to Nicole. Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful observations, your thoughts. Nicole is going to keep us coming back to those 4 questions about work, barriers, assets, and actions. as we're connecting the Sarah Weston Seton portrait to this portrait of Catherine Hoof Green.
Right. So I'd like for us to just do a very kind of simple compare and contrast with these two portraits. So first off, what do you notice in these two portraits that maybe is different in regards to work? Your answers could be, maybe what details you notice with the portrait of Catherine Hoof Green on the right, and what that might tell us about what she does for work.
So we're starting to get comments that one is older, perhaps she's already raised her children. There's perhaps a loneliness there, maybe because she's in the portrait by herself. And Nicole, somebody's already saying that she's got something in her hands.
Good eye. I'm realizing it's a little hard to see with the Learning Lab icon. So I'll zoom in here to this. Yeah, she has this piece of paper in her hands. You can see here at the bottom. Okay. Yeah. All right. So, thinking about what this woman on the right might do for work, and how that differs from Sarah Seton, who we discussed earlier. And it sounds like there's some who are familiar with Catherine Hoof Green's work in the chat. I will tell you that the newspaper that she's holding references her work with the Maryland Gazette. So it is a newspaper in her hand. Okay, so now I'd like for us to think about, again, this is just with the visual elements that we see here. Do you think Catherine Hoof Green had similar barriers to Sarah Seton, or were her barriers different? And if so, explain.
And Nicole, while you're waiting for responses to come in, I was just looking at some of the other observations from before, that it looks like Catherine Hoof Green has sort of a feeling of resignation, and that it's a less glamorized depiction of our subject. The brushstrokes on her face are more apparent. There's a stronger value contrast in her face. And also perhaps her gaze, maybe it's not resignation, maybe it is more like dreaming, that she has space for herself.
Yeah, I'm loving all these comments that are coming in, and thinking about, perhaps her gender, or her barriers are still gender-based, but if she's a widow, maybe she has agency. So thinking about the age of our sitter here, and maybe how that might play into it. Yeah, sadness, regret. Yeah, so and I like how a lot of you are looking to, her clothing and the objects that we see here, and how they differ very much. And I love how that's impacting your reading of this portrait. So I'm going to just take a pause briefly right now to introduce this sitter that we're looking at. So Catherine Hoof Green, she was born in the Netherlands, immigrated to the United States, and eventually found herself in Maryland. She married a newspaper editor of the Maryland Gazette, and in the 1760s, her husband died, and that left the company to their family. Catherine Hoof Green, she had 14 children, and only 6 of those survived into adulthood. But that business, it did not go to her children. She took over the business of the Maryland Gazette, and this portrait is one that she commissioned in 1769, and she she asked Charles Willson Peale to create this portrait. If you're familiar with the history of American art, that's probably a pretty familiar name. So I think that really speaks to kind of the confidence that she had. And just kind of thinking about that confidence, she took over the newspaper during the Revolutionary War. It was a great forum for people to discuss what it would be to be a citizen in a new nation. And she also, on the business side of things, she paid off all of her husband's debts in 3 years, and also turned the office space that her husband was leasing, and she purchased it. So she definitely had the right to feel confident in her abilities. So the newspaper, as some of you pointed out earlier, it references her work in the Maryland Gazette, as well as the artist, kind of even offering some tidbits as well about his return from England to the United States. So with that in her, or with that kind of in your mind, I'd like for us to return to kind of these kind of analyzing the work of women questions. We've talked a little bit about her work and some of the barriers that she faced, but now knowing a bit more about her biography, I'm curious to hear from you on what strengths and desires really stood out to you in her story, or also even with what you see in this portrait. And there's great connections to others from the period as well. Thinking about what it means to be a widow, and the freedom that offered many women. And yeah, legal personality. Wow. Okay, but yeah, thinking about those barriers, being pregnant 16 times, definitely.
And her independence, right, certainly was an asset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, looking at her, sense of calm and self-confidence, definitely an asset. Oh, I like this phrase, financial wizard. Thanks, Viva. Yeah. Okay. And now moving to the last question of this group of 4. How did your subject, or how does the sitter in this portrait, how do they find ways to be powerful?
And Nicole, Devin had just mentioned in the chat that owning a paper denotes power. So thinking about that. Mm-hmm. Resolving her husband's debts, her business sense. And then also just thinking visually about the colors that she's wearing. Right, she's wearing blue, light brown, very fashionable for the time. Mm-hmm. She hasn't stopped living, right? She's carried on from her husband's professional role.
Yeah, using her position as editing this newspaper to direct, public opinion, to direct kind of the thoughts that were crucial during the Revolutionary War. Yeah, kind of that self-expression through journalism.
Right, and again, the power that we see is shown in her clothing, in her dress, the lace, etc.
Okay. Oh, these are all great thoughts. In the interest of time, I know we are flying through this modeling. I'd just like to kind of offer you a glimpse of the other elements of this lesson, so you can get a sense of how you could utilize this in your classroom. So again, we were in the second lesson today, and today, Brianna and I chose to focus on Sarah Seton and Catherine Hoof Green. In this Learning Lab collection, there is another sitter that you could highlight, as well as with these primary source documents. And then the option to kind of explore work at different moments in American history and think about how those roles have changed. So Phyllis Wheatley would work as a great comparison and contrast, kind of substitute portraits out. And Catherine Hoof Green, who we looked at, as well as Betty Friedan and Charlotte Perkins, Seton Gilman as well. So this was the second lesson and part of this 3. The first focuses on kind of the claim support question thinking routine and utilizing portraits of the Impressionist artist Mary Cassatt. So looking at a self-portrait of hers as well as how other artists have portrayed her, and then connecting them to other artists such as Edmonia Lewis and Sarah Milliam Peel. And then also the option to connect it to kind of the now as well. So thinking about women and work and work as an artist. And then the last section, as Brianna mentioned, focuses on kind of bringing the past to the present. So for this, kind of connecting those ideas of Sarah Seton as this woman hostess and kind of connecting that to kind of the power that first ladies hold. And so with this activity, students choose a first lady and kind of storyboard their life. And then at the end of this Learning Lab collection, the teaching posters that Brianna mentioned, as well as additional resources, and then the lessons pulled directly from the curriculum guides so that are brought out. And if this is your first time with us today, at the end of every section, there is this link to the main collection. So we just move these around so we can navigate there. So this really houses the meat of the Expanding Roles of Women curriculum guide. So here you can find links to all of the lessons, all of the subcategories such as professionals that we discussed today, and suffragists and radicals. So how this is organized is kind of an introduction to the curriculum guide with a background essay. If you are new to using portraiture as a primary source document or as kind of an entry point for your work, I'd invite you to check out the Reading Portraiture 101 guide. There's a lot of great thinking routines and ways to think about portraits included there. The lesson plans, these are these 3 right here. We focus again on professionals today, but links to those collections can be found here. And then finally, these assessments. I'll pull up the assessments because they look a little bit different than the lessons. They follow a similar format. Let's see, I hope it is this one. Sorry, my computer is getting a little slow. So here's an example of one of the assessments, and this one to really think about or draw in all of the lessons. Your students can take on a role of one of the women at this kind of imagined convention. None of these women attended a women's rights convention altogether, but think about their perspectives and have them in a sense kind of role play what a convention might look like. So researching, kind of visualizing and planning that out. The second one highlights civic engagement, inviting students to research kind of the visual culture of the suffrage movement, and then to create kind of their own campaign strategy. And so it's a bit more kind of hands-on and arts-based, but a great way to kind of assess student knowledge. So there's a lot of great information in these Learning Lab collections. Brianna, I really hope that you find these useful. I'm going to return just back to this main collection just to show you a few of the remaining resources before we wrap up. And the teaching posters are also in this main collection, so you're welcome to download them from here, as well as the curriculum guide. And again, thanks for your patience as this loads. There's a lot of portraits, so it takes a little while sometimes. So again, the teaching posters here that I mentioned earlier, and additional resources. So helpful websites, online exhibitions that really pull from a lot of the portraits in the curriculum guide. And then finally at the end, videos for educators. So if you'd ever like to rewatch this webinar, you're welcome to watch it on the Learning Lab or on our YouTube channel. They're there. So if you ever need some ideas on how to use the collection, you can go from there. And I know that was a lot of information that I just threw out at you. I'm going to put the link in the chat to this main collection, and you'll be able to access all of the materials that we looked at today, as well as others from this one link.
Excellent, Nicole, thank you for taking everybody through the Learning Lab collections. I really appreciate it.